The white light of Kepler-9 research station cast harsh shadows across Lieutenant Commander Mira Valen's face as she strode down the sterile corridor. Her boots clicked against the polished floor in perfect rhythm, echoing the mechanical precision with which she approached every task. The hum of life support systems provided a constant backdrop to the silence of space, a silence Mira had learned to appreciate during her 7 years stationed on this remote asteroid belt outpost. Today's assignment broke the monotony of her usual duties. A scout ship had crashed 3 days ago under circumstances that command found suspicious, at best treasonous, at worst. The pilot had survived and initial interrogations had yielded nothing but silence and the occasional sardonic comment. "Status report," Mira demanded as she approached the security checkpoint outside the detention block. "Prisoner remains uncooperative, Commander," replied the young guard, straightening her posture instinctively under Mira's unflinching gaze. "He requested water twice and has otherwise maintained silence since 0600 hours. Mira nodded curtly. "I'll handle this personally now. You're dismissed." The guard saluted and stepped aside. As the heavy doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss, Mira composed her features into the mask of authority that had earned her both respect and a certain fearful distance from her subordinates. She'd built her reputation on unwavering discipline and absolute loyalty to the Galactic Council, qualities that had propelled her through the ranks despite her youth. At 34, she was the youngest officer ever to command a security division on a Class 1 research facility. The interrogation chamber was deliberately austere. A single metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs and walls of brushed steel that reflected the overhead lights with clinical precision. In one chair sat the prisoner Captain Ryan Holt, according to his identification chip, though Mira suspected that was as false as his claim of navigational malfunction. His posture surprised her. Where most detainees hunched with defeat or tension, Holt sat with an almost casual confidence, his shoulders relaxed despite the restraints binding his wrist to the table. He looked up as she entered, and Mira found herself momentarily caught in the intensity of his gaze, dark eyes that seemed to evaluate her with the same clinical detachment she typically reserved for others. "Captain Holt," she said, placing a digital tablet on the table between them. "I trust you've been treated according to Protocol 5-7. A faint smile played at the corners of his mouth. "If that's the protocol that includes terrible food and aggressive silence, then yes, Lieutenant Commander Valen. Your hospitality has been impeccable." He knew her name. Mira kept her expression neutral, but internally she recalibrated. Either he'd been briefed by his handlers, or he'd accessed information he shouldn't have been able to reach. "Your scout ship's registered flight path shows a deliberate deviation into restricted space," she said, activating the tablet to display the trajectory analysis. "The damage patterns are inconsistent with your claim of asteroid collision, and your communication array was deliberately disabled, not damaged in the crash." Holt glanced at the data, then back at her face. "Fascinating interpretation. Perhaps your equipment needs calibration." Mira leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly. "We found isotope residue consistent with Council military-grade stealth technology. Technology that was reported stolen from base Daedalus 3 months ago." "Coincidences are remarkable things," Holt replied, his smile widening just slightly. "There are no coincidences in restricted space," Mira countered. She slid her finger across the tablet, bringing up another display. "Your biometric readings during processing showed anomalous patterns. Care to explain?" "Old sports injury plays havoc with scanners." The casual dismissal sparked a flash of irritation that Mira rarely allowed herself to feel, much less display. "This isn't a game, Captain. Insurgent activity has increased 7-fold in this sector. Your presence here—" "Maybe I just wanted to see the famous Kepler-9 station for myself," he interrupted. "I've heard the sunrises are spectacular, though I'm still waiting to catch one from my accommodations." The deliberate provocation worked. Mira slapped her palm against the tablet, sending it skidding across the table. "Enough. Your uniform lacks proper military identification. Your ship contained encrypted data packets we still can't access, and your implant signature doesn't match any registered Alliance citizen." Holt laughed. Actually laughed, and the sound echoed off the metal walls like something alien and forbidden. "My implant signature, I assure you. Commander, everything about me is perfectly standard issue." Something in his tone and the mocking light behind his eyes snapped the thread of Mira's carefully cultivated control. She circled the table in 3 quick strides and grabbed the front of his gray uniform jacket. "Standard issue, let's see, shall we?" The fabric tore under her fingers with a satisfying rip, exposing a section of chest that instantly made her freeze. Where the standard military biochip would be embedded just below the left collarbone, a small, silver-blue rectangle visible beneath the skin of every registered Alliance citizen from birth. Holt's chest bore something altogether different. The implant was circular, with a faint golden glow pulsing beneath the surface of his skin. Intricate circuitry patterns radiated outward, like a miniature sun. Mira's hand remained frozen against his chest, her fingers just centimeters from the unknown device. In all her years of service, she'd never seen technology like this, certainly nothing approved for human implantation. "Not what you expected?" Holt asked, his voice suddenly serious, the mockery gone. His eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity. "Now you understand why I couldn't explain." Mira stepped back, professionally composed once more, despite the hammering of her heart. "Guards," she called, never taking her eyes off the implant or the man. "Prepare the prisoner for transfer. My authorization, Valen Alpha 97. Holt raised an eyebrow. "Transfer, am I being upgraded to a room with a view?" "You're being moved to secure containment," Mira replied, gathering her tablet. "Under my direct supervision." As the guards entered and began to unshackle Holt from the table, Mira's mind raced through regulations, protocols, and the proper channels for reporting anomalous technology. Yet, she found herself saying nothing as they marched their prisoner out the torn uniform, revealing just a glimpse of that golden circle glowing against his skin. For the first time in her career, Lieutenant Commander Mira Valen chose silence over immediate reporting. She told herself it was for security purposes, that the fewer people who knew about this technology, the better. But deep down, a different truth whispered. She wanted to understand this mystery herself before surrendering it to the Council scientists, who would dissect both the implant and its host without hesitation. That night, the clean white light of Kepler 9 station seemed suddenly inexplicably ominous. Mira's private quarters were Spartan by choice rather than regulation. A narrow bed, a desk, and a single armchair occupied the main living space, with a small adjoining bathroom, providing the only privacy the station architecture allowed. She'd declined the larger commander's suite that came with her promotion, preferring the functional efficiency of standard officer housing. Now, however, she found herself wishing for more space as she keyed in the security override that would bring Ryan Holt to her door. The transfer order she'd issued was unorthodox, but technically within her authority as head of security. The official record indicated that the prisoner required specialized monitoring due to potential health complications, not entirely untrue, given the unknown implant. What the record failed to mention was that this specialized monitoring would happen in her personal quarters, away from the surveillance systems that recorded every moment in the detention blocks. The door slid open, revealing 2 guards flanking Holt, whose hands were now bound before him with standard-issue restraints. His torn uniform had been replaced with a simple gray jumpsuit, the kind issued to all detainees. Something about seeing him in those institutional clothes heightened the reality of what she was doing, breaking protocol for a prisoner who might well be an insurgent spy. "Secure him to the chair," she ordered, pointing to the armchair positioned against the far wall. "Then you're dismissed." "Commander." The senior guard looked uncertain. "Regulations require at least 1 security officer present during interrogations outside designated facilities." Mira fixed him with the steel gaze that had earned her the nickname Ice Valen among junior officers. "Are you questioning my authority, Lieutenant?" No, Commander, This isn't an interrogation, she cut him off. It's a medical observation under security protocols. Unless you've suddenly acquired expertise in xenobiometric technology, your presence is unnecessary. The guards exchanged glances, but knew better than to argue further. They secured Holt's restraints to a bracket on the chair's arm and left without another word, though Mira didn't miss the speculative look the junior guard cast over his shoulder as the door closed behind them. Alone with her prisoner, Mira activated the privacy shield that would prevent any electronic surveillance of her quarters, another technically permissible but highly unusual action that would certainly raise questions if documented. Xenobiometric technology, Holt repeated, raising an eyebrow. Interesting choice of words. Mira retrieved a handheld scanner from her desk drawer. I needed them gone. Don't read too much into it. And yet here I am in your private quarters, rather than a laboratory or high-security cell. He leaned back in the chair, watching her with that same unsettling intensity. Either you're planning to dissect me personally, or you're not sharing your discovery with your superiors. I wonder which it is. I've filed the appropriate reports, Mira said, activating the scanner. It was only a partial lie. She had indeed filed reports, just not complete ones. Of course you have. His tone made it clear he didn't believe her. May I ask what you hope to accomplish with that outdated piece of equipment? She approached him, scanner held before her like a shield. This outdated equipment is calibrated to detect energy signatures that standard medical scanners might miss. Ah, looking for radiation leaks. Worried I might contaminate your pristine quarters. I'm looking for answers, Mira replied, beginning to scan his chest, where the implant glowed beneath the thin fabric of the jumpsuit. The device in her hand hummed softly, its display flickering with readings that confirmed her suspicions. The energy signature wasn't like anything in the Alliance database. What you're looking for, Holt said quietly, is a reason not to turn me over to your superiors. You saw something in that implant, something that made you question your orders. Mira's hand stilled. My orders are to determine the nature of the threat you pose. And if I pose no threat at all, what then, Commander? She continued scanning, moving the device in methodical patterns across his chest. Everyone poses some kind of threat. It's just a matter of identifying which kind. The scanner's display suddenly flashed red, indicating an energy spike. At the same moment, Holt inhaled sharply, his body tensing against the restraints. Does it hurt? Mira asked, withdrawing the scanner slightly. Only when prodded by curious officers with questionable equipment, he replied through gritted teeth. She set the scanner aside, and acting on instinct, rather than protocol, pressed her fingers gently against the jumpsuit where it covered the implant. The fabric was warm, warmer than it should have been from body heat alone. It's protecting itself, Holt explained, his breathing evening out as the pain apparently subsided. It interprets certain energy frequencies as attacks. You speak of it as if it's sentient. Not sentient. Adaptive. For the first time, he looked away from her, fixing his gaze on the blank wall opposite. It was designed to integrate with neural patterns to learn and respond to its host's physiological state. Mira pulled up her desk chair and sat facing him close enough that their knees nearly touched. Who designed it, Captain? And what is its purpose? He met her eyes again. If I told you, you'd be obligated to report it. And once reported, neither of us would leave this station alive. The statement should have sounded melodramatic, paranoid even. But something in his steady gaze made the hairs on the back of Mira's neck stand up. She'd served the Council faithfully for 15 years, rising through the ranks with unwavering loyalty. Yet, in recent months, certain orders had given her pause directives that seemed increasingly militaristic, focused on weapons development, rather than the scientific exploration Kepler-9 had been established to pursue. You're suggesting the Council would eliminate its own officers to protect this information. I'm suggesting, Holt replied carefully, that there are factions within the Council who believe the ends justify any means. Mira stood abruptly and walked to the small window that looked out into the vastness of space. Stars glittered against perfect blackness, unchanging and indifferent to the political machinations of humanity. She'd always found comfort in that perspective, the reminder that individual lives were insignificant against the cosmic scale. Now that same thought filled her with a strange unease. "I need time," she said, finally, turning back to face him. "Time to verify your claims before taking any irreversible action. Time is the one luxury we may not have, Commander." Holt shifted in his restraints, wincing slightly. "These cuffs are starting to affect circulation. If you're planning a lengthy analysis, you might consider alternatives that won't result in nerve damage." Mira hesitated. Removing or even loosening the restraints violated every security protocol she'd ever enforced. Yet, if she truly believed his implant posed no immediate danger, and if she meant to keep him here for extended observation, certain accommodations would be necessary. She reached a decision and crossed to a storage compartment, removing a different set of restraints. These were designed for medical transport, more comfortable, with additional range of motion, but equally secure. "I'll replace them," she said, approaching him again. "But understand that any attempt to escape or attack will be met with immediate and decisive force." "Ever the diplomat," Holt murmured. His smile returned, though it seemed more genuine than mocking now. "I assure you, Commander, escape isn't my objective." "Then what is?" "Survival," he answered simply. "And perhaps, if I'm very lucky, understanding." The strange sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. As she unlocked the standard restraints and carefully applied the medical alternative, she found herself studying his face with new attention. The lines around his eyes spoke of stress and insufficient sleep. A small scar cut through his left eyebrow, long healed, but still visible. Despite his defiant posture and verbal sparring, exhaustion shadowed his features. Mira secured the new restraints, which allowed his arms to rest more naturally. "Better." He flexed his fingers, nodding. "Thank you." The simple gratitude felt oddly intimate in the confined space of her quarters. Mira moved away quickly, returning to the professional distance that had defined her career. "I'll need to run further tests on the implant signature," she said, gathering her scanner. "You should rest while you can. Tomorrow will involve more extensive questioning." "You always tear first, ask questions later," Holt asked. And though the words could have been accusatory, his tone held something closer to genuine curiosity. Mira paused, the memory of ripping his uniform flashing vividly in her mind. "That was unprofessional. I apologize." "Apology accepted, though unnecessary." He settled back in the chair, the new restraints allowing him to find a more comfortable position. Sometimes, instinct reveals more truth than careful questioning ever could. She didn't reply, unsure how to interpret the statement, or why it left her feeling strangely exposed. Instead, she activated the sleep function on the quarter's lighting system, dimming the main area, while leaving the small desk lamp illuminated for her continued work. As the night cycle progressed, Mira analyzed the scanner data, while Holt dozed intermittently in the chair. The readings confirmed what she'd already suspected: the implant emitted an energy signature unlike any Alliance technology. More puzzling still, the pattern changed subtly over time, as if responding to some external stimuli she couldn't identify. Around 300 hours, she noticed Holt watching her through half-lidded eyes. "Do you ever sleep, Commander?" he asked, voice rough with exhaustion. "When necessary," she replied, not looking up from her data. "And when is that? When your body physically collapses, or when the Council grants you permission?" The jab struck closer to home than she cared to admit. Mira had been reprimanded twice for exceeding recommended waking hours during critical operations. Her superior officer had called it admirable dedication, undermined by physiological limitations, a phrase that still rankled years later. "Sleep is inefficient," she said simply. "Sleep is human," Holt countered. "Though perhaps that's the problem. The Council seems increasingly determined to engineer humanity out of its officers." Mira finally looked at him directly. "What would you know about the Council's intentions? You're an insurgent, a criminal. Is that what they told you?" That anyone who questions their authority is an insurgent? He shifted the restraints, clinking softly. Have you ever asked yourself why the rebellion exists at all? What drives educated, reasonable people to risk everything opposing a system that claims to protect them? Ideological fanaticism. Mira answered automatically, repeating the explanation she'd heard countless times in briefings. A fundamental misunderstanding of the sacrifices necessary for human advancement. Holt's laugh held no humor this time. That's what they've told you, but you're too intelligent to accept such simplistic answers. His eyes, fully alert now, despite the late hour, held hers with uncomfortable intensity. The truth, Commander Valen, is that the Council has been systematically eliminating technologies that threaten its absolute control, particularly those that might facilitate peace with non-human species. The accusation was so outlandish that Mira almost laughed. Peace. The Drift War devastated 3 colony worlds. 17 million human lives lost to alien aggression. There is no peace to be had. That's the official narrative, Holt said quietly. One that conveniently omits the Council's first strike policy, the weaponization of terraforming technology, the deliberate destruction of alien cultural sites to provoke reaction. Propaganda. Mira dismissed, though a whisper of doubt crept unbidden into her thoughts. Our history archives are curated by the same institution that orders the destruction of inconvenient truths, he finished for her. This implant you're so curious about, it's one of those inconvenient truths. Mira's hand moved unconsciously to the data tablet containing her scans. Explain. It's a neural translator, a peace weaver designed to bridge the gap between human and non-human cognition. Holt's voice had dropped to nearly a whisper, as if the walls themselves might be listening, despite the privacy shield. But more than that, it's proof that communication is possible. That coexistence isn't just a naive dream. The claim was so contrary to everything Mira had been taught, everything she'd built her career defending, that her instinct was immediate rejection. Yet the evidence of her own scanner technology, unknown to Alliance databases' energy patterns, unlike anything in human development, gave her pause. If what you're saying were true, she said carefully, why would the Council suppress such technology? Peace would benefit everyone. Peace would benefit humanity, Holt corrected. But it wouldn't benefit those whose power depends on perpetual conflict, on the militarization of society in the name of security. Before Mira could respond, the station's alert system blared to life, the sudden wail of sirens cutting through their conversation like a physical force. Red emergency lights pulsed from recessed panels in the ceiling, bathing the room in crimson. Mira was on her feet, instantly moving to the communications panel by the door. Valen here. Status report. The response came through heavy static. Commander, we're tracking multiple asteroid fragments on collision course. Defense grid is responding, but system overload is imminent. All personnel to emergency stations. As if to punctuate the warning, the station shuddered violently, throwing Mira against the wall. The lights flickered, dimmed, then stabilized at half power. In the same moment, the temperature noticeably dropped as life support systems diverted energy to the defense grid. Mira glanced at Holt, still secured to the chair. Protocol dictated that prisoners be escorted to designated secure areas, during emergencies areas that would be heavily monitored and staffed with security personnel, who would immediately question why this particular prisoner was in her custody rather than detention. Another impact rocked the station. This time, the lights went out completely for 3 long seconds, before emergency backups engaged, casting the room in dim blue illumination. Commander! Holt's voice cut through the blare of the sirens. Whatever you decide to do with me, you need to do it quickly. If the defense grid fails— It won't fail, Mira interrupted, but the uncertainty in her own voice betrayed her. Kepler-9 had weathered asteroid storms before, but never one severe enough to trigger full emergency protocols. Her communication panel chimed with an incoming priority message. Admiral Norvik's face appeared on the small screen, his expression grave beneath the flashing emergency lights, visible behind him. "Commander Valen, report to Command Center immediately," he ordered without preamble. "And bring the prisoner. His execution has been authorized effective immediately." Mira felt her blood run cold. "Execution, sir, on what grounds?" "Classified," Norvik snapped. "But the order comes directly from Council Primary. No appeals, no delays. Report immediately." The screen went dark before she could respond, leaving her staring at her own reflection in the blank display. Behind her, Holt sat perfectly still, his face unreadable in the dim blue light. "Well," he said finally, "it seems your council has made the decision for you." Mira turned slowly to face him. The station shuddered again, but this time she barely registered the impact. "How did they know you were with me?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "The same way they know everything," Holt replied. "Every conversation is monitored, every action tracked. Your privacy shield might block standard surveillance, but do you really believe there aren't overrides for officers of Norvik's rank?" He was right, of course. Mira had authorized such overrides herself for high-value targets. The realization that she had become such a target, that her loyalty was now suspect enough to warrant surveillance, sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the failing temperature controls. "They were watching," she said, more to herself than to him. "Everything we discussed, they heard. And now they've decided we both know too much." Holt shifted in his restraints, leaning forward with sudden urgency. "You have a choice to make, Commander, but you need to make it now." Another violent shudder rocked the station, this one sustained long enough that Mira had to brace herself against the wall. The emergency lights flickered ominously. "Station integrity compromised in Section 7. An automated voice announced over the comm system. Emergency bulkheads engaged. Life support at 67% capacity and declining." In that moment, with alarms blaring and the station groaning around them like a wounded animal, Lieutenant Commander Mira Valen made the first truly independent decision of her career. She crossed the room in 3 quick strides and unlocked Holt's restraints. "Can that implant do what you claim?" she demanded, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Can it truly facilitate peace?" Holt rubbed his wrists where the restraints had left faint marks. "It can. It already has on worlds beyond Council control." "Then we're leaving," Mira said, moving to a storage locker and retrieving her sidearm. "But not to the command center." She tossed him a thermal jacket standard issue for EVA preparation and pulled on one herself. The station's temperature was dropping precipitously as life support continued to fail their breath, now visible in small clouds before their faces. "The docking bay?" Holt asked, shrugging into the jacket. Mira shook her head. "Too obvious. They'll have it covered." She activated a hidden panel beside her bed, revealing a small arsenal of weapons and survival gear. "We'll use the maintenance tunnels to reach the hydroponics bay. There's an emergency shuttle access there for evacuating critical research specimens." "You've thought about escape routes before," Holt observed, watching, as she efficiently packed a small survival kit. "I think about contingencies," Mira corrected, tossing him a second sidearm. "It's my job." He checked the weapon with practiced ease that confirmed her suspicions about his military background. "And what contingency is this?" My superiors ordered me to execute a prisoner without trial contingency." "The I need answers that I won't get if you're dead contingency," she replied, securing the survival pack to her back. "Let's move." They slipped into the corridor, which was now bathed in the eerie blue of emergency lighting. The temperature had dropped enough that frost was beginning to form on metal surfaces, delicate crystalline patterns spreading like alien flora across the walls. Most of the station personnel would be at emergency stations or in designated shelter areas, but Mira still proceeded with caution, checking each intersection before advancing. The maintenance access hatch was hidden behind a decorative panel, one of many architectural concessions to the human psychological need for aesthetics, even in functional spaces. Mira entered her security code, but the panel remained sealed. "Override in effect," she muttered, pulling a small device from her pack. "They're locking down escape routes. "Can you bypass it?" Holt asked, positioning himself to watch the corridor while she worked. "I designed half the security protocols on this station," Mira replied, connecting her device to the access panel. "Which means I also know their weaknesses." The hatch clicked open after 30 seconds of rapid coding, revealing a narrow tunnel bathed in red emergency lighting. Mira gestured for Holt to enter first, then followed, sealing the hatch behind them. The maintenance tunnels were cramped and utilitarian, with exposed conduits running along the walls and ceiling. Their breath clouded more densely here, the temperature significantly lower, without the benefit of the main heating systems. They moved quickly, Mira, leading the way through the labyrinthine passages, with the confidence of someone who had studied the station's schematics extensively. After several minutes of silent progress, a particularly violent impact sent them both sprawling against the metal grating of the tunnel floor. Overhead, a conduit ruptured, releasing a pressurized spray of coolant that instantly crystallized in the freezing air. "Defense grid failure imminent." The station's automated system announced its calm voice, incongruous with the chaos surrounding them. "All personnel evacuate to emergency shelters. Repeat, all personnel evacuate." Holt helped Mira to her feet, his hand lingering on her arm longer than necessary. "We need to move faster." She nodded, pushing aside the strange warmth his touch had sparked despite the cold. "Hydroponics is 2 levels down. The access elevator should still be operational on backup power." They reached the maintenance elevator, little more than a reinforced platform with safety rails, and Mira activated it with her security override. As they descended, the sounds of the station's distress grew more distant, replaced by an ominous creaking, as metal contracted in the increasingly frigid conditions. The hydroponics bay was a stark contrast to the sterile corridors above. Even in emergency lighting, the lush green of cultivated plants created a surreal oasis amid the technological environment. The air here was noticeably warmer and heavy with moisture, though still far colder than the optimal growing conditions the bay normally maintained. "The shuttle access is through the primary research section," Mira said, leading the way past rows of hydroponic tanks where leafy vegetables grew under specialized light panels, now dim to conservation levels. They had only made it halfway across the main grow area when a voice called out from behind them. "Commander Valen." Mira spun weapon raised to find Lieutenant Rask, one of Norvik's direct reports, standing at the hydroponics bay entrance with 2 armed security officers. Their weapons were already drawn and aimed. "Step away from the prisoner," Rask ordered, advancing slowly. "Admiral Norvik sent us to assist you when you failed to report to command." "The emergency interrupted the prisoner transfer." Mira replied, her tone professionally neutral, despite the adrenaline surging through her system. "I'm escorting him to secure containment in Research Section 3. Rask's expression made it clear he didn't believe her. "That's not what your communication logs indicate, Commander. You've been compromised." He shifted his aim from Holt to Mira. "Both of you are under arrest for treason against the Galactic Council." Time seemed to slow as Mira processed this development. Arrest meant interrogation. Interrogation meant death, either quick by execution or slow through psychological disintegration. Either way, the truth about Holt's implant would be extracted and suppressed any hope of peaceful contact with alien species buried along with them. She made her decision in microseconds, relying on instinct, honed through years of combat training. In one fluid motion, she dropped to one knee and fired, hitting the primary lighting control panel on the wall behind Rask. The remaining lights in the hydroponics bay went out completely, plunging the vast room into near-total darkness, broken only by the faint glow of emergency strip lighting along the floor. Gunfire erupted immediately, energy bolts sizzling through the humid air. Mira rolled behind a hydroponic tank, pulling Holt down beside her, as nutrient solution sprayed from ruptured pipes above them. "When I give the signal head for the east exit," she whispered the phosphorescent plants around them, casting a faint green glow across their faces. "Keep low and use the tanks for cover." Holt nodded, his expression grim but determined. The implant beneath his jacket glowed more brightly now, visible even through the fabric, responding perhaps to his elevated heart rate or the surge of adrenaline. More energy bolts pierced the darkness, one, striking close enough that Mira felt the heat of it against her cheek. She counted the shots, tracking the officers' positions by sound as they moved through the rows of plants. "They're splitting up," she murmured. "Standard search pattern. Wait for my count." She reached into her pack and removed a small spherical device, a sonic disruptor designed for riot control rather than lethal force. After a quick adjustment to maximize its range, she activated it and rolled it toward the center of the bay. 3, 2, 1 now. The disruptor detonated with a concussive wave that knocked the pursuing officers off their feet, accompanied by a high-pitched whine that would disorient them for precious seconds. Mira and Holt burst from their hiding place, sprinting low among the hydroponic tanks toward the eastern research section. They had almost reached the exit when the station's gravity suddenly fluctuated. Mira felt her body lighten alarmingly, her next step sending her floating several feet into the air. The asteroid impacts must have damaged the gravity generators, a critical system failure that indicated the station's condition was deteriorating faster than she'd anticipated. "Grab something," she called to Holt, reaching for a sturdy pipe running along the ceiling. The reduced gravity made movement unpredictable. A push too forceful could send them flying across the room. Holt managed to catch a support beam, but as he did, the gravity fluctuated again, this time increasing briefly to nearly twice normal levels before cutting out entirely. The sudden pressure, followed by weightlessness, created a disorienting sensation that left Mira momentarily incapacitated, her inner ear struggling to adapt. Through the haze of vertigo, she saw one of the security officers regaining his footing, using a hydroponic tank to stabilize himself as he raised his weapon toward Holt, who was now floating helplessly several meters above the floor. Without conscious thought, Mira pushed off from her position, propelling herself through zero gravity, directly into the path of the officer's aim. She fired her own weapon at the same moment he did, the recoil sending her spinning through the air. She felt a searing pain across her upper arm, where his shot had grazed her, but had the satisfaction of seeing him collapse as her bolt found its target. The momentum of her defensive move had sent her careening toward the high ceiling of the hydroponics bay. She reached out desperately for anything to halt her trajectory, but found only empty air. Below, Holt had managed to grab a lighting fixture and was pulling himself hand over hand toward her, but he wouldn't reach her in time to prevent a collision with the unforgiving metal above. Just as impact seemed inevitable, Mira felt a strange sensation, as if invisible hands had caught her, slowing her momentum gradually, until she hung suspended just centimeters from the ceiling. Confused, she looked down to see Holt, with one hand stretched toward her, the other still gripping the light fixture. His face was contorted with concentration, and the glow from his implant had intensified to a brilliant gold that illuminated the darkness around them. Before she could process what was happening, the gravity system surged back online. Mira dropped, but again her fall seemed controlled. Her descent slowed to a gentle float, rather than the dangerous plummet physics demanded. She landed beside Holt, who was now breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "What did you just—" she began, but the wail of approaching security alarms cut her off. Later, Holt gasped, taking her arm and pulling her toward the exit. "We need to keep moving." The shuttle access was hidden behind what appeared to be a standard storage unit in the research section. Mira entered her command override, praying that this system at least hadn't been locked down. To her relief, the false panel slid aside, revealing a small airlock, and beyond it, a two-person emergency evacuation shuttle. As they entered the airlock, the station rocked with the most violent impact yet. Warning lights flashed, and the automated system's voice took on a new urgency. "Critical structural failure imminent. Evacuate immediately. Repeat, evacuate immediately." The inner airlock door sealed behind them, and the outer door opened to reveal the shuttle, little more than a reinforced pod, with minimal life support and navigation capabilities. Designed for short-range evacuation to the nearest Alliance outpost, it would provide temporary safety, but limited options for true escape. Mira initiated the launch sequence, while Holt secured their meager supplies. The shuttle's systems hummed to life displays illuminating the small cockpit, with data on the deteriorating status of the station around them. Launch trajectories locked, the shuttle's computer announced, preparing for emergency departure. Through the viewports, they could see the hydroponics bay beginning to rupture as pressure differentials strained against weakened bulkheads. Frost formed rapidly on every surface, beautiful and deadly in its crystalline perfection. "Commander Valen," Admiral Norvik's voice crackled through the shuttle's communication system. "Override code Norvik Epsilon 7. Abort launch sequence immediately." Mira's fingers hesitated over the control panel, years of conditioned obedience fighting against her newfound resolve. In that moment of hesitation, the outer airlock began to close. Norvik had accessed the emergency protocols remotely. "Mira," Holt said urgently, using her first name for the first time. "We won't get another chance." She made her choice. Overriding the airlock closure, she slammed her palm against the launch initiator. The shuttle's engines fired with a roar that vibrated through the small craft, propelling them away from the failing station, just as the hydroponics bay collapsed behind them in a spectacular eruption of frozen gases and plant matter. As Kepler 9 receded in the viewport, growing smaller against the backdrop of space, Mira felt a weight simultaneously lift from and settle upon her shoulders. She had committed fully to a path of no return, betrayed her oath, her superiors, and the institution to which she had dedicated her life. Yet in doing so, she had perhaps preserved something more important, the possibility of truth. Beside her, Holt sat in exhausted silence, the glow of his implant now dimmed to a faint pulse beneath his thermal jacket. After several minutes of watching the navigation displays and ensuring they weren't being pursued, Mira finally turned to him. "You used that implant somehow," she said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. "When I was falling, you controlled gravity." Holt shook his head weakly. "Not controlled, influenced. The implant doesn't generate power. It channels it, translates intent into energy manipulation." He touched his chest, where the device glowed beneath skin and fabric. "It takes a toll." Indeed, he looked drained, his skin ashen, dark circles prominent beneath his eyes. Whatever the implant had done had clearly cost him physically. "You saved my life," Mira said simply. "You saved mine first," he replied, a ghost of his earlier smile returning briefly. "I'd say that makes us even, but I suspect we're both just getting started on a very long debt." The shuttle's navigation system chimed, indicating they had cleared the immediate danger zone around the failing station. Mira checked the readouts, calculating their options with the practiced efficiency of a career officer. "We have enough fuel to reach the Eris sector," she said, adjusting their course slightly. "It's largely uninhabited, minimal Alliance presence. There's an abandoned moon base in the outer reaches," Holt suggested, his voice growing stronger as he recovered from whatever exertion the implant had demanded. "Research outpost from before the Drift War. The rebellion has used it occasionally as a waypoint." Mira raised an eyebrow. "So you admit you're with the rebellion?" "I admit I know of them," he corrected carefully. "As do you now by association." His expression grew serious. "There's no middle ground anymore, Commander. You've crossed a line the Council never forgives." The truth of his words settled like ice in her stomach. There would be no returning to her old life, no explaining away her actions as a temporary lapse in judgment or a misunderstanding of orders. She had made her choice, and now she would have to live with its consequences, whatever they might be. "The base it is," she said, finally inputting coordinates based on his directions. "But I want the full truth, Holt. Everything about that implant, about what it can do, about why the Council wants it destroyed. No more vague accusations or half explanations." He studied her face for a long moment as if measuring her readiness for whatever secrets he possessed. Then he nodded slowly. Fair enough. But you might want to call me Rian now. I think we're well past military formalities. The request, simple as it was, somehow made the enormity of their situation more real than anything else had. Lieutenant Commander Mira Valen and Captain Ryan Holt no longer existed in any official capacity. They were now just Mira and Ryan fugitives, bound together by circumstance and a shared secret that powerful forces would kill to protect. Ryan, she repeated, testing the name and finding it strangely comfortable on her tongue. Set course for the moon base and start talking. The outpost's name, or what remained of it on the weathered sign outside the primary dome, was Lunaris Research Station Gamma. Long abandoned by official Alliance channels, most of its structures stood in various states of decay, collapsed corridors, rusted equipment and viewports frosted with the accumulation of years of exposure to the harsh lunar environment. Yet the station's core infrastructure remained surprisingly intact. The main habitat dome still held atmosphere, its ancient but well-engineered life support systems humming back to life as Mira coaxed power through previously dormant circuits. Emergency lighting cast long shadows through rooms that had once housed ambitious scientists and researchers before the Drift War changed priorities from exploration to militarization. Home, sweet home, Rian murmured, surveying the dusty command center they'd claimed as their primary shelter. He'd shed his thermal jacket as the environmental systems slowly raised the temperature to habitable levels, the implant in his chest now just a faint, golden glow beneath his prison-issue shirt. Mira had been uncharacteristically quiet during their approach, and landing focused on evading detection and securing their immediate survival. Now, as she methodically examined the station systems and supplies, her mind raced with questions she'd suppressed during their escape. "You promised explanations," she said, finally turning from the ancient control panel she'd been attempting to activate. Starting with that, she pointed at his chest. Ryan settled onto a dusty chair, wincing slightly, as his exhausted body registered the extent of its injuries and exertions. "It's called a harmony core." He began, his fingers unconsciously tracing the outline of the implant beneath his shirt. "Developed jointly by human and drift scientists in a research colony beyond Alliance jurisdiction." "That's impossible," Mira interrupted. "The Drift have rejected all attempts at communication since the war began. They've attacked every diplomatic vessel sent into contested space." "Alliance diplomatic vessels," Ryan corrected. "Ships bearing the same insignia as the fleet that bombarded their central temple complex on Iridia. The Council's version of history conveniently omits that particular first strike." Mira wanted to dismiss his claim as propaganda, but her training in intelligence analysis forced her to consider an uncomfortable possibility that the historical record she'd been taught could be incomplete, deliberately edited to justify ongoing military operations. After all, hadn't she herself witnessed the Council's willingness to execute without trial or explanation? "Continue," she said, neither accepting nor rejecting his version of events. "What does the implant do exactly?" "At its most basic level, it's a translator not of language, but of consciousness." Ryan leaned forward, his fatigue seemingly forgotten, as passion animated his features. Drift neural structures process reality fundamentally differently than human brains. What we perceive as linear, they experience as concurrent. What we categorize as separate, they understand as connected. The harmony core bridges that gap, allowing the wearer to comprehend drift communication and, to some extent, experience reality through their conceptual framework. The implications were staggering. If true, this technology represented a paradigm shift in interspecies relations, a genuine opportunity for peace, through understanding, rather than forced conformity. "And the gravity manipulation?" Mira pressed, remembering how he had somehow slowed her fall in the hydroponics bay. A secondary function discovered by accident," Ryan explained. The drift don't perceive gravity as a force, but as a relationship between objects. The core translates that perception into a form of limited telekinetic ability, though using it extensively is. He gestured to his exhausted state. Taxing. Mira paced the small command center, absorbing this information against the backdrop of everything she'd been taught about the drift vicious, incomprehensible aliens bent on human extinction. If Ryan was right, that narrative was not just flawed, but deliberately fabricated to perpetuate conflict. Why would the Council suppress this technology? She asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Peace would benefit humanity. Peace would benefit humanity, Ryan agreed, echoing their earlier conversation. But it would devastate the military-industrial complex that the Council has built its power upon. War drives innovation, justifies control, and most importantly distracts the population from questioning authority. He paused, watching her process this heretical perspective. The Council doesn't want peace, Mira. It wants compliance. She stopped pacing suddenly, aware of a weight at her collar. Her fingers found the command insignia, still pinned to her uniform, the symbol of her rank, and the authority she had wielded so confidently mere days ago. With a decisive motion, she unpinned it and placed it on the dusty console beside her. The symbolic gesture wasn't lost on Rian, who watched with quiet understanding but offered no comment. Some transitions required silence to be fully realized. "How many others have this implant?" she asked after a moment. 12 that I know of, he replied. Scattered throughout contested space, working to establish communication channels with drift communities. I was returning from a successful contact mission when my ship was damaged by an Alliance patrol. The emergency beacon activated automatically. I couldn't override it in time. Mira nodded, the pieces falling into place. And they brought you to Kepler 9 because it's a research station. They wanted to study the implant before destroying it and you. Precisely. Ryan stood, moving closer to where she stood by the console. But they didn't anticipate you, Mira. Your curiosity, your integrity, your willingness to question when things didn't add up. The compliment unsettled her, not because it was unwelcome, but because it contradicted everything she'd believed about herself. She'd always prided herself on loyalty, on following orders without question. Had integrity been there all along, dormant beneath layers of conditioned obedience? "We need to contact the others," she said, redirecting the conversation to practical matters. "Alert them that the Council knows about the Harmony Core." Rian shook his head. Secure communication from this base would be impossible without alerting Alliance monitoring systems. Besides, they're already cautious. When I missed my rendezvous, protocols would have been activated to protect the program. Then, what's our next move? Mira asked the question, encompassing far more than immediate tactical concerns. Before Ryan could answer, a soft ping emanated from the console where Mira had deposited her command insignia. She reached for her weapon instinctively, but Ryan was faster, examining the insignia with careful fingers. "It's a tracking beacon," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "But it's not Alliance frequency. Someone else is looking for us." Mira's combat instincts flared. "We need to move, now." "Wait." Ryan held up a hand, studying the insignia's signal pattern. "I recognize this frequency. It's a Rebel Identification Code 1. I've used myself." He looked up at her, excitement replacing fatigue in his expression. "They've found us." "That's not possible," Mira argued. "The insignia is Council-issued. It can't be transmitting Rebel codes." "Unless it was designed to," Ryan countered. "How long have you had this particular insignia?" Mira thought back. 3 months. It was replaced after my previous one was damaged during a training exercise. "And who replaced it?" "Dr. Evelyn Sharp, the station's chief medical officer." As Mira spoke, the name realization dawned. She always seemed uncomfortable around Admiral Norvik. I assumed it was just professional tension, but she's one of us, Ryan confirmed. Or at least a sympathizer. She must have suspected you could be trusted and wanted to ensure you could be found if necessary. The revelation that rebellion sympathizers had been operating on her station right under her nose was a humbling blow to Mira's professional pride. Yet it also sparked a strange hope. If Dr. Sharp had seen something in her worth saving, perhaps her journey from loyal officer to fugitive wasn't as abrupt as it appeared. A soft hum vibrated through the station's structure, distinct from the ambient sounds of the life support systems they'd activated. Mira recognized it immediately, a shuttle's approach thrusters, carefully modulated to minimize detection. "Someone's landing," she said, moving swiftly to the command center's viewport. Through the dusty transparency, she could make out a small craft settling onto the abandoned landing pad, outside sleeker than Alliance models with none of the military markings she was accustomed to seeing. "Rebel transport," Ryan confirmed, joining her at the viewport. "Civilian design modified for stealth operation." Mira's hand hovered near her weapon. "How do we know it's not a trap? The Council could have captured Rebel craft, decoded your signals." "We don't," Ryan admitted. "But staying here without supplies or communication isn't an option either." They watched as the shuttle's hatch opened, revealing a single figure in environmental gear appropriate for the moon's thin atmosphere. The visitor approached the habitat dome with measured steps, making no attempt to conceal their presence or scan for hostiles, either supremely confident or deliberately projecting non-aggression. When the figure reached the airlock, Mira took position with her weapon ready, while Ryan activated the entry sequence. Stale air hissed as pressure equalized, and the inner door slid open to reveal their visitor, removing their helmet. A woman with close-cropped silver hair and eyes the color of aged whiskey regarded them with calm assessment. "Captain Holt," she acknowledged with a nod. "And Lieutenant Commander Valen. I'm glad to see you both alive." Her gaze lingered on Mira. "Especially you, Commander. Your decision to aid rather than execute proves Dr. Sharp's faith in you was not misplaced." "Who are you?" Mira demanded, weapon still raised. "Tile," the woman replied simply. "Just Tile. I operate as liaison between rebel cells in this sector." She stepped fully into the habitat, seemingly unconcerned by Mira's drawn weapon. "And I'm here to offer you both passage to safety and purpose if you're seeking it." Ryan moved forward, clasping the woman's forearm in what appeared to be a customary greeting. "The core network," Tal nodded. "Compromised, but not destroyed. Your capture accelerated certain timelines, but also created new opportunities." Her gaze shifted meaningfully to Mira. "Opportunities like bringing Alliance officers of conscience into the fold." Mira lowered her weapon, slowly, sensing no immediate threat from this composed woman. "I haven't agreed to join your rebellion. I made one decision to prevent an unjust execution." "One decision is how it always begins," Tail replied with the faintest smile. "Tell me, Commander, before you tore open Captain Holt's uniform, had you ever questioned an order? Ever wondered about the truth behind Council directives?" The question struck uncomfortably close to thoughts Mira had buried for years. Small moments of doubt she'd dismissed as irrelevant to her duty. "My concerns were compartmentalized," she admitted. "As they train you to do," Tail said, no judgment in her tone. "Effective conditioning relies on isolation, keeping questions separate, so they never form a pattern that might lead to larger doubts." She gestured to the abandoned research station around them. This facility was dedicated to xenolinguistics before the Council redirected all research toward military applications. The scientists here were asking questions too dangerous to allow. How do we communicate with them? How do we understand? Ryan touched his chest where the implant glowed faintly. "They got their answer eventually, just not through official channels." Tail nodded. "And now the Council knows we've succeeded where they claimed success was impossible. They'll be desperate to contain that knowledge to eliminate everyone connected to the Harmony Core program before word spreads." "Everyone, including me now." Mira noted the reality of her situation, settling more firmly with each moment. There would be no returning to her old life, No possibility of explaining away her actions as a misunderstanding or temporary lapse in judgment. Yes, Tell confirmed. But that also means you're uniquely positioned to help us. Your knowledge of Alliance security protocols, command structures, communication channels, these are invaluable to our cause. Mira felt a reflexive resistance to the idea of actively working against the institution she'd served for her entire adult life. Yet the evidence before her was compelling. The Council had ordered Ryan's execution without trial, suppressed technology that could bring peace, perpetuated war based on historical falsehoods. If even half of what she'd learned was true, her oath to protect humanity obligated her to act. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked carefully. Tell reached into a pocket of her environmental suit and produced a small data crystal. This contains evidence of Council manipulation of historical records regarding first contact with the Drift. Footage of the Iridia bombardment communications, proving it was unprovoked testimonies from officers who were ordered to falsify reports afterward. She placed the crystal on the dusty console. "We have the truth. What we lack is a way to distribute it through Alliance channels, channels you have access to, Commander." Mira eyed the data crystal skeptically. "My access codes will have been revoked the moment I fail to deliver Ryan for execution." "Your personal codes, yes," Tile agreed. "But not the structural vulnerabilities you're aware of as head of security on a Class 1 facility. Not the override sequences, the emergency protocols, the communication redundancies built into the system." She was right, of course. Mira's knowledge extended far beyond her personal authorization. She knew the architecture of Alliance information systems intimately, including their weaknesses. "You want me to help you hack the Alliance broadcast network?" She said, not a question, but a confirmation. "We want you to help us tell the truth," Ryan interjected, moving to stand beside her. "To give humanity the information they need to make informed choices about this conflict, rather than blindly following Council directives based on lies." Mira looked between them, the rebel operative with her calm certainty, and the man whose implanted technology represented a future the Council had actively suppressed. Then, she glanced down at her discarded command insignia, the symbol of authority she'd once worn with pride. "If we do this," she said slowly, "there's no middle ground, no compromise position. It's all or nothing." "It always was," Tal replied simply. "The Council just worked very hard to make you believe otherwise." The weight of the decision pressed on Mira with physical force, the culmination of small doubts and uncomfortable questions she'd suppressed throughout her career. Yet strangely, as she contemplated betraying everything she'd been taught to believe in, she felt a clarity she hadn't experienced in years. "I'll need access to a secure terminal," she said, finally, "and time to evaluate the evidence before I decide exactly how to proceed." Tail's expression remained neutral, but approval flickered in her eyes. "My shuttle has the equipment you need. And as for time," she glanced at Ryan, who looked increasingly drained as the adrenaline of their escape faded. "I think we all could use some rest before the next phase begins." As they prepared to board Tail's shuttle, Mira took one last look at the abandoned research station, a relic of a time when humanity's purpose in space had been discovery rather than dominance. The parallel to her own transformation was not lost on her. She too had been repurposed, her natural curiosity and intelligence channeled into enforcing a system she now questioned fundamentally. "Ready?" Ryan asked softly, appearing beside her at the habitat's viewport. The golden glow of his implant pulsed gently beneath his shirt, somehow both alien and essential, like the new perspective taking shape in Mira's mind. "Not yet," she admitted, "but I'm getting there." His hand found hers in the dim light, a simple human contact that somehow bridged worlds of difference between them, former captor and captive officer, and Rebel One, human reaching toward another, across the artificial divides of politics and power. "That's enough for now," he said. And for the first time since she'd torn open his uniform in that interrogation room a lifetime ago, it seemed Mira genuinely believed it might be. The rebel sanctuary was nothing like Mira had imagined during her years of Alliance security briefings. Rather than the chaotic, improvised base, she'd been taught to expect the underground facility on Asterope, a small moon in the outer reaches of the Pleiades system, was a model of efficiency and organization. Repurposed mining tunnels housed living quarters, communication centers, and medical facilities, all operating with a discipline that rivaled Alliance installations. 3 days had passed since their rescue from the abandoned research station. Mira had spent most of that time reviewing the data Crystal Tail had provided, verifying its authenticity, with the rigorous skepticism of her intelligence training. What she found had shaken her to her core, irrefutable evidence that the Drift War had indeed begun, with an unprovoked Alliance strike, authorized by Council members, seeking to consolidate power through military expansion. Now, she sat in a small strategy room with Ryan Tail and several rebel commanders discussing the logistics of their planned information breach. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. Success could mean the beginning of peace. Failure would certainly mean their deaths and the continuation of a pointless conflict. The Council's flagship, the Indomitable, will be in broadcast range of the Central Network Hub in approximately 48 hours. Mira explained, indicating a tactical display where ship movements were tracked in real time. During the annual address to the colonies, security protocols are temporarily modified to allow for maximum transmission range. That creates our window. What kind of window are we talking about? Asked Commander Drayson, a former Alliance officer who had defected years earlier after witnessing Council atrocities on a contested world. 3 minutes, maybe 4, Mira replied. Enough time to upload and initiate a system-wide broadcast of the Iridia footage and supporting documents. Once it begins, they won't be able to stop the transmission without shutting down the entire network, which they won't do during a Council address. Tail nodded thoughtfully. And you're confident you can bypass the security measures? With the right equipment and access codes, yes. Mira had spent hours analyzing the encryption protocols used for broadcast security. The system was designed to prevent external intrusion, but it's vulnerable to authenticated access from recognized command channels. If we can replicate those signals. We can, Ryan interjected, using the codes embedded in your command insignia and modified with current rotation algorithms. He'd been working alongside Mira throughout their sanctuary stay, his knowledge of communication systems, complementing her security expertise. The rebel commanders exchanged glances, communicating silently in the way of people who had worked together under pressure for years. Finally, Tail spoke for the group. It seems our best opportunity. The question remains, how do we get close enough to the broadcast hub without detection? Even with Commander Valen's codes, we'd need physical proximity to initiate the upload. The Council delegation will be accompanied by a support flotilla, Mira pointed out. Service vessels, diplomatic shuttles, media transports. With the right identification signatures, we could approach as part of that legitimate traffic. And if we're challenged, Drayson pressed. Then we have a problem, Mira admitted. But the sheer volume of traffic during a Council address works in our favor. Verification procedures become cursory when dealing with hundreds of authorized vessels, all arriving simultaneously. The discussion continued, dissecting potential problems and solutions with methodical precision. Throughout, Mira found herself impressed by the rebels' professionalism and strategic thinking qualities the Alliance had always claimed were lacking in insurgent elements. Yet another lie she'd been taught to believe. Later, as the meeting dispersed and various teams moved to begin preparations, Rian found Mira alone in a small observation alcove. He looked healthier than he had on the moon base, the exhaustion of their escape gradually fading from his features. "Credit for your thoughts," he asked, settling beside her on a bench carved from the moon's native stone. "I was thinking about perspective," Mira replied, watching through a reinforced viewport as small ships came and went from the sanctuary's concealed landing bays. "How easily it changes when you step outside the frame you've always known." Ryan nodded, understanding without need for elaboration. The first time I experienced drift perception through the Harmony Core, I was physically ill for 3 days. Their reality, the interconnectedness of all things, the simultaneity of past and future, it was too much for my linear human brain to process. How did you adapt? Mira asked, genuinely curious. The implant and its capabilities remained something of a mystery to her, despite the days they'd spent together. I stopped fighting it, he said simply. Stopped trying to force their reality to conform to my understanding, and instead allowed my understanding to expand. He touched his chest, where the implant glowed faintly beneath his shirt. He'd been given proper clothing upon their arrival at the sanctuary, but still favored simple, practical attire. The core helps translate, but the willingness to see differently, that has to come from within. The parallel to her own transformation wasn't lost on Mira. She too was learning to see differently, to recognize that her loyalty to humanity wasn't the same as loyalty to the Galactic Council, that her oath to protect could be better fulfilled through rebellion than obedience. Will it work? She asked suddenly. The broadcast. Will it actually change anything? Ryan considered the question seriously. By itself, no. People don't abandon established beliefs based on a single revelation, no matter how shocking. But it will plant seeds of doubt, create questions that demand answers. He turned slightly to face her more directly. The Council has maintained control through information management, deciding what people know and how they interpret it. Once that monopoly is broken, genuine change becomes possible. Mira nodded, appreciating his honesty. She'd seen enough of political machinations to know that revolutions rarely happened overnight, that systems resisted change with the stubborn persistence of physical laws. What happens after? She asked, the question encompassing more than just their immediate mission. To the rebellion? To the peace efforts? To... She hesitated, uncertain how to articulate the more personal aspect of her concern. To us, Rian finished for her, a small smile softening his features. That depends, I think, on what you want to happen. The question caught Mira off guard. What did she want? For so long, her wants had been subsumed by duty, her personal desires, secondary to the requirements of her position. Now, finding herself suddenly without those constraints, she struggled to identify her own wishes, independent of external expectations. I want the truth to be known, she said finally. I want to continue working toward actual peace, not the military dominance the Council calls peace. She paused, gathering courage for the more personal admission. And I want to understand more about the Harmony Core, about the possibilities it represents for genuine communication between different types of consciousness. Ryan's expression brightened at this last statement. That could be arranged. If our broadcast succeeds, if we create enough pressure for the Council to acknowledge their deceptions, there's a research colony where human and drift scientists work together. They're always looking for minds open to new perspectives, especially those with different backgrounds and expertise. A former Alliance security officer might not be their first choice, Mira pointed out wryly. Or exactly what they need, Ryan countered. Understanding doesn't come from everyone thinking alike. It comes from bridging different viewpoints, finding common ground across apparent divides. A subtle shift in the sanctuary's ambient lighting indicated the transition to night cycle. Around them, activity continued unabated as preparations for their mission intensified. We should get some rest, Mira suggested suddenly, aware of the fatigue weighing on her, despite the stimulation of planning and strategy. Tomorrow will require clear thinking. Ryan agreed, and they walked together through the sanctuary's winding corridors toward the small quarters they'd been assigned. Their rooms were adjacent, a practical arrangement, given their collaborative work, but one that had created a comfortable proximity neither seemed inclined to disrupt. At Mira's door, Rian paused. Whatever happens with the broadcast, he said quietly, I want you to know that your choice that moment when you decided not to follow execution orders, it matters. Even if nothing else changes, that one decision already changed everything for me. The simple sincerity of his words touched something in Mira that had been armored for too long. On impulse, she reached out and took his hand, feeling the warmth of human connection that had been absent from her life during years of professional isolation. "It changed everything for me too," she admitted, "though I'm still figuring out exactly what that means." His fingers tightened briefly around hers. "That's enough for now," he said, echoing his words from the moon base with a small smile. And once again, Mira found herself believing it might be. The approach to the broadcast hub unfolded with surprising ease. Their shuttle, modified to transmit identification codes harvested from Mira's command insignia and updated through Rebel intelligence channels, merged seamlessly with the flow of support vessels surrounding the Council flagship. Tal, piloted with the confident precision of someone accustomed to operating in hostile territory, while Ryan monitored communications and Mira prepared the data package for upload. Entering broadcast range in 90 seconds, Tal announced, her voice calm despite the tension evident in her posture. "Any challenges yet?" Ryan shook his head, one hand pressed to a communication receiver in his ear. "Standard automated acknowledgement only. They're too overwhelmed with legitimate traffic to scrutinize individual vessels." Mira completed the final encryption sequence that would protect their transmission until the moment of broadcast. "Upload package ready. We'll need to be within 50 kilometers of the hub for reliable connection." The shuttle moved smoothly through the organized chaos of arrival traffic, just another service vehicle in a sea of similar craft. Through the viewport, Mira could see the imposing bulk of the Indomitable, the Council flagship that represented everything she had once served without question. Its sleek design emphasized power and dominance, bristling with weapon systems that could level a small city in minutes. 30 kilometers in closing, Tel reported, initiating sensor deflection protocols. This was the most delicate part of their approach. While their identification codes would pass cursory inspection, any detailed scan would reveal modifications that would immediately trigger security protocols. The Rebellion had developed technology to confuse standard Alliance scanners, making their shuttle appear as little more than background static when actively scanned, but its effectiveness at close range was uncertain. "We have an incoming directed scan," Rian warned, his body tensing as he monitored the communication array. "Security vessel at our 4 o'clock. Mira moved to the tactical display, assessing their options with the calm efficiency that had defined her military career. "Adjust course 3 degrees port. Put that diplomatic transport between us and the security vessel." Tal complied without question, demonstrating the fluid hierarchy of the Rebellion, where expertise rather than rank determined command in specific situations. The maneuver worked. The security vessel scan passed harmlessly through the diplomatic transport, its sensors registering nothing suspicious about their shuttle. 20 kilometers, Tal announced. "Broadcast hub locked in targeting array." "Preparing for upload," Mira replied, fingers dancing across the communication console. This was the moment everything had been building toward, the culmination of her transformation from loyal officer to active rebel. Strange how natural it felt now, how right when just days ago the very thought would have been abhorrent to her. "Wait," Ryan said suddenly, his hand going to his chest where the Harmony Core implant glowed beneath his shirt. "Something's wrong." Mira looked up sharply. "What is it?" "The core, it's responding to something. Some kind of signal or—" He grimaced clearly in discomfort. "I think we're being targeted. Not by conventional weapons, but by something designed to detect the implant specifically." Alarm flashed through Mira. If the Council had developed technology to identify Harmony cores remotely, their entire mission was compromised. Worse, it suggested a level of knowledge about the implants that should have been impossible without direct study. "How?" she demanded. "How could they know to look for it?" "I don't," Ryan began, but was cut off by a priority alert on the communication system. "Incoming transmission." Tal reported, her calm demeanor finally showing cracks of concern. "Alliance military frequency directed specifically at our shuttle." "Put it through." Mira ordered, mind racing through contingencies. Perhaps they could still bluff their way through claim communication, Malfunction, divert to an emergency approach vector. The view screen activated to reveal a face Mira knew all too well. Admiral Norvik, his steel-gray eyes as cold and calculating as she remembered from countless briefings on Kepler 9. Lieutenant Commander Valen. He greeted her with false cordiality. How disappointing to find you in such questionable company. And Captain Holt, or should I say Agent Holt, your little rebellion seems determined to test my patience today. Mira kept her expression neutral, despite the shock rippling through her. Agent Holt. She glanced at Ryan, whose face had gone very still, the glow of his implant visibly intensifying beneath his shirt. Whatever you're planning, Norvik continued, I suggest you reconsider. Our new Harmony detection grid is lighting up quite dramatically in your vicinity. An interesting technology, isn't it? Especially when reversed to locate rather than translate. Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. The Council hadn't just learned about the Harmony cores. They'd adapted the technology for their own purposes, weaponizing what had been designed for peace. We have you locked in multiple targeting systems, Norvik informed them, with the casual ease of someone discussing weather patterns. Surrender now, and perhaps some of your group might survive long enough for proper interrogation. Tail's hands remained steady on the shuttle controls, but Mira could see the calculation in her eyes, assessing escape routes, probabilities, sacrifices that might be necessary. The rebellion operated on the understanding that no individual, no matter how valuable, was worth the larger cause. Including her, including Rian. If you had firing solutions, Admiral, Mira replied with a confidence she didn't entirely feel, you wouldn't be talking to us now. You'd have already taken the shot. A flicker of annoyance crossed Norvik's features. Always the tactician, Valen. But you've overlooked a critical factor. We don't want to destroy the core. We want to study it, replicate it for military applications. A functional specimen is far more valuable than a vaporized one. Mira's mind raced. They needed less than a minute of uninterrupted connection to initiate the broadcast, but with targeting systems locked on them, any suspicious transmission would trigger immediate response. Approaching 15 kilometers to broadcast hub, Tail murmured, her voice pitched low enough that the communication system wouldn't pick it up. What's your proposal, Admiral? Mira asked deliberately, drawing out the conversation while her fingers worked beneath the console edge, adjusting the upload sequence for rapid deployment. Simple surrender, Norvik replied. Power down your systems, prepare to be boarded. In return, I personally guarantee that any non-implanted personnel will be treated according to prisoner of war protocols, rather than executed for treason. His gaze shifted to Ryan. Agent Holt, unfortunately, has more specialized value. Before Mira could respond, Ryan leaned forward into the communication field. You're lying, Norvik. You've already replicated the core technology. Your detection grid proves that. What you want is to silence us before we can reveal the truth about Iridia, about the Council's war crimes, about the peace you've systematically sabotaged. A cold smile spread across Norvik's face. Truth is such a subjective concept, Agent Holt. What matters is who controls the narrative, a battle you've already lost. He glanced off-screen, presumably, at tactical data being provided by his officers. You have 30 seconds to comply before we disable your vessel. I suggest you use them wisely. The transmission cut abruptly, leaving them in tense silence, broken only by the soft hum of the shuttle systems. 12 kilometers, Tal reported. Boarding range in 25 seconds. We won't make it to optimal broadcast position. Mira concluded the tactical reality, clear, despite her desperate hope for alternatives. We need to transmit now from current position. Signal degradation will be significant, Ryan warned. The evidence may not transmit cleanly enough to be convincing. It's our only chance, Mira insisted, already reconfiguring the transmission parameters to compensate for the increased distance. Better partial truth than none at all. Tal nodded her agreement, adjusting the shuttle's position to maximize transmission effectiveness. Ready when you are. Mira hesitated for just a moment, her finger poised above the initiation sequence. Everything she'd been, everything she'd believed had led to this moment of irrevocable choice. Once the broadcast began, there would be no possibility of claiming coercion or manipulation, no path back to her former life. She pressed the control without further hesitation. "Transmission initiated," she announced as the console lights shifted to indicate active broadcast. "Estimated upload time 48 seconds. Incoming!" Ryan called out a split second before the shuttle rocked violently under the impact of a focused ion pulse, non-lethal, but designed to disable electronic systems. Shields, holding at 62%. Tael reported her hands dancing across the controls as she initiated evasive maneuvers. "They're being careful not to damage us too severely." The core, Mira realized aloud. "They're afraid of damaging the implant." Ryan's expression tightened with sudden decision. "Then, let's use that against them." He moved to the navigation console, his hands linking with Tael's, in what appeared to be a prearranged protocol. Broadcast status. 29 seconds remaining. Mira replied, struggling to maintain her balance as the shuttle lurched through another evasive pattern. "But our connection is degrading. We're losing data integrity." "I can boost the signal," Ryan said, his voice taking on an odd resonance. "Through the core." Mira looked up sharply, understanding immediately what he intended. "The strain could kill you. We saw what happened when you used it to manipulate gravity. This would be orders of magnitude more demanding." "It's what the core was designed for." He countered, already establishing a direct link between his implant and the communication array. "Translating between systems that aren't meant to interface." Another impact shook the shuttle, more powerful than the first. Warning lights flashed across multiple consoles as systems began to fail. Shields at 31%, Tael reported grimly. "One more hit like that and our transmission capability will be compromised." "Do it," Mira told Ryan, the tactical reality overriding her personal concern. "But let me help stabilize the connection." Without waiting for his agreement, she moved to his side, linking her console with his, and establishing support protocols that would route power from non-essential systems to maintain transmission integrity. Her fingers brushed his as they worked in tandem, and she felt an electric jolt that had nothing to do with the shuttle's systems. The Harmony core's glow intensified dramatically as Ryan activated its full capabilities, the golden light now visible through his shirt like a miniature sun embedded in his chest. His face contorted with concentration and pain as the implant drew on his body's resources to amplify the transmission signal. Broadcast stabilizing. Mira confirmed, watching as the integrity metrics climbed back into viable range. 20 seconds remaining. "Alliance vessels moving to intercept," Tael warned. "Multiple targeting solutions locked." Evasive pattern Delta. Mira ordered, falling back on her military training. "Keep changing vector every 5 seconds. Make them recalculate continuously." The shuttle lurched and twisted through space as Tael executed the maneuver with practiced skill. Around them, Alliance vessels moved to establish a containment perimeter, their weapon systems glowing with barely contained energy. 15 seconds. Mira counted down, watching both the transmission progress and Ryan's increasingly strained expression. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the core drew more deeply on his physiological resources, his breathing becoming labored. Another impact more devastating than the previous two combined. The shuttle's lights flickered and died, secondary systems engaging with a reluctant whine. "Shields critical," Tael reported. "Communications array damaged, but still transmitting." 10 seconds. Mira continued, refusing to abandon hope, despite the deteriorating situation. Her hand found Ryan's on the console, offering human connection as a counterpoint to the technological strain ravaging his system. "They're preparing to board," Tael warned, nodding toward the viewports, where an Alliance interceptor had matched their trajectory and was extending docking mechanisms. "Let them come," Ryan gasped, his voice strained but determined. as long as the transmission completes. 5 seconds, Mira counted. 4, 3. A final devastating impact sent them all sprawling, as emergency lighting bathed the shuttle interior in harsh, red illumination. Alarms blared from multiple systems, warning of imminent failure. Transmission status, Mira demanded, pulling herself back to the console. For a breathless moment, there was no response as the system struggled to re-establish basic functionality. Then, with a soft chime that seemed almost apologetic in its modesty, the console displayed a simple message: transmission complete. "It's done!" Mira breathed disbelief and triumph mingling in her voice. The broadcast went through. Ryan collapsed against the console, the glow of the Harmony core finally dimming to its normal subtle pulse. Mira moved to him immediately, supporting his weight as Tail continued her desperate battle to maintain shuttle control. "Did it work?" he asked weakly, looking up at her with eyes glazed from exertion. "Will they see?" "Yes," Mira assured him, though she had no way of knowing how many received the transmission, how many would believe it, how many would act on what they learned. "They'll see the truth." The sound of the airlock being forcibly breached echoed through the shuttle. Alliance boarding parties would be inside within moments, armed and authorized to use whatever force necessary to secure the vessel and its occupants. "Tail," Mira called, making a rapid decision. "Escape protocol, now." The rebel operative hesitated clearly, torn between her mission to preserve the core technology and her loyalty to her comrades. "Both of you." "Just him," Mira countermanded, helping Ryan toward the small emergency evacuation pod built into the shuttle's rear compartment. "The core is too valuable to lose. I'll stay and delay them." "Mira, no," Ryan protested weakly, though he lacked the strength to physically resist as she guided him into the pod. "They'll execute you on sight." "Not if they think I might lead them to you," she countered rapidly, programming the pod's navigation system. "Norvik wants the core intact. He'll keep me alive as leverage." The sounds of Alliance forces breaching the outer airlock grew louder. They had seconds, not minutes. "I'm coming back for you," Ryan promised, his eyes clearing slightly as determination overcame physical exhaustion. "Whatever it takes." "I know," Mira replied, and was surprised to realize she believed it completely. She pressed a final command sequence, sealing the evacuation pod and initiating its launch cycle. Just before the outer hatch closed between them, she leaned forward and pressed her lips briefly to his, a promise of farewell, a beginning. Then, she turned to face the boarding party, weapon drawn, but held at her side in a posture that conveyed neither surrender nor immediate threat. The truth was broadcast. The core technology was safe. Whatever happened next, those victories could not be undone. The shuttle's inner door burst open, and Alliance soldiers poured through, weapons raised and targeting systems locked on her position. Behind them came Admiral Norvik himself, his expression a study in controlled fury as he surveyed the shuttle's interior and noted the conspicuous absence of their primary target. "Where is he, Valen?" Norvik demanded, gesturing for his soldiers to secure the bridge. "Where is Agent Holt?" "Beyond your reach," Mira replied calmly, allowing her weapon to be taken without resistance. "As is the truth now." Norvik's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You think your little broadcast will change anything? The Council controls the narrative. We'll dismiss it as terrorist propaganda, doctored footage, desperate fabrications of a failing rebellion." "You can try," Mira acknowledged. "But doubt once planted is difficult to eradicate completely. People will question, people will investigate, and each person who discovers the truth becomes another seed of change." The Admiral studied her with cold calculation, clearly reassessing her potential value as a prisoner versus the satisfaction of immediate execution. "Take her to the Indomitable," he ordered finally. "Maximum security containment. I want her isolated from all other personnel and prepared for intensive interrogation." As Alliance soldiers secured her in restraints, Mira maintained the composed dignity that had defined her military career. But now that composure served a different purpose, a different loyalty. She caught Tail's eye briefly, as they were separated for transport, communicating silently that their mission against all odds had succeeded. The evidence was transmitted. The truth was revealed. And somewhere beyond the Council's reach, the Harmony Corps continued its work of translation and understanding, a beacon of possibility in a world too long defined by conflict. For Lieutenant Commander Mira Valen, former Alliance officer and newly minted rebel, that knowledge was enough to face whatever came next with unwavering resolve. The interrogation chamber aboard the Indomitable reflected the Council's approach to dissent, sterile, methodical, and utterly without compassion. Unlike the relatively humane facilities on Kepler-9, this room was designed specifically for psychological breakdown, featuring variable lighting that disrupted circadian rhythms, sound dampening that created unsettling partial silence, and environmental controls that could shift from uncomfortable heat to bone-chilling cold without warning. Mira had been confined here for what her internal clock suggested was approximately 3 days, though without external references, certainty was impossible. True to Norvik's orders, she had been kept in complete isolation, her only human contact coming during brief interrogation sessions conducted by specialists whose faces remained obscured behind opaque tactical visors. The questions followed predictable patterns. Where had Rian gone? How many other Harmony Corps existed? Who were his contacts within the rebellion? What were the access codes for rebel communication channels? Mira provided no answers beyond her name and former rank, deploying the resistance techniques she had once taught to Alliance officers at risk of capture. During the long hours between interrogations, she focused on maintaining her mental acuity through meditation and memory exercises. She also listened carefully to the ambient sounds of the flagship tracking shift changes and alert statuses, building a mental map of operations that might eventually prove useful. On what she estimated to be the 4th day, the pattern changed. Rather than the usual interrogation team, Admiral Norvik himself entered the chamber, accompanied by a single aide carrying a datapad. The Admiral looked different somehow, his customary confidence tempered by something that in another man, Mira might have identified as concern. "Lieutenant Commander Valen." He greeted her formally, as if this were a standard briefing, rather than a hostile interrogation. "I trust you've been treated according to protocol." "If by protocol you mean the Council's classified guidelines for breaking political prisoners, then yes," Mira replied, her voice rough from disuse, but steady. "Quite by the book." Norvik's mouth tightened slightly at her defiance. "I've always respected your intelligence, Valen. Your dedication to duty. That's what makes your betrayal so particularly disappointing." "My duty is to humanity," Mira countered, "not to an institution built on lies." The Admiral signaled his aide, who activated the datapad and placed it on the small table between them. The screen displayed what appeared to be news broadcasts from various colony worlds, though the sound was muted. "Your rebel broadcast created some disruption," Norvik admitted reluctantly. "Protests on several outer colonies, questions from planetary governors, formal inquiries from independent media outlets." Mira kept her expression neutral, though internally she felt a surge of vindication. The truth had found purchase, just as she'd predicted. "Nothing we can't manage," Norvik continued, his tone hardening. "The Council has weathered political storms before. This will pass like all the others." "Will it?" Mira asked quietly. "Or is this just the beginning?" Something flickered in Norvik's eyes. Not fear exactly, but the uncomfortable awareness of a tactical situation shifting beyond his control. "That depends partly on you, Commander. On what you choose to share with us about the rebellion's further plans, about the location of other Harmony Corps agents, about the communication channels they're using to spread their misinformation." "You mean the truth," Mira corrected. "The documented evidence of the Council's first strike against the Drift, the historical record you've been suppressing for decades." Norvik leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Let me explain something to you, Valen, that your newfound rebel friends clearly failed to mention. The truth, as you call it, is a luxury that those responsible for billions of lives cannot always afford. His expression hardened. Yes, the council authorized the Iridia strike. Yes, certain historical records were adjusted to present a narrative more conducive to public morale. But these decisions were made for humanity's survival, not for the political convenience you imagine. Mira studied him carefully, sensing that beneath his justifications lay something closer to genuine belief than she had expected. Explain, she said simply. The Admiral hesitated clearly, weighing the risks of sharing classified information against the potential value of swaying her loyalty back to the Council. Finally, he nodded to his aide, who left the interrogation chamber, sealing the door behind him. What I'm about to tell you is known only to the highest levels of Council leadership. Norvik began his voice, taking on a gravity Mira had rarely heard from him. Long before the public first contact with the Drift Council, exploratory vessels had encountered their outposts. Initial observations indicated a civilization fundamentally incompatible with human cognitive patterns, a species that experiences reality in ways our minds simply cannot process without technological intervention. The Harmony Core, Mira supplied. A later development, yes, Norvik acknowledged. But at the time, all we knew was that every attempt at communication resulted in severe psychological trauma for our personnel. Exposure to drift communication methods led to insanity in 63% of test subjects, catatonia in another 22%. Only a small fraction maintained functional cognitive abilities, and even they reported profound dissociation from normal human perception. Mira frowned, processing this information against what she had learned from Rian. So, the Council decided to strike first before widespread contact could occur. It was deemed the only viable option for protecting humanity's collective psychological integrity. Norvik confirmed. The Iridia strike wasn't about territory or resources. It was a preventative measure against a form of existential threat our public could neither understand nor prepare for. The explanation contained just enough logic to be plausible, yet Mira sensed critical information still missing. And when the Harmony Core technology was developed, when peaceful communication became possible without psychological damage, Norvik's expression hardened. By then, the war narrative was established. Millions had died. Billions more had oriented their lives around the conflict. You've seen how even our partial truth has created instability. Imagine the societal collapse if the Council were to suddenly announce that the entire war was based on a misunderstanding that millions died because we lacked technology we now possess. So instead, you suppressed the technology, Mira concluded. Persecuted those who developed it. Executed anyone who tried to use it for its intended purpose of fostering understanding. We did what was necessary to maintain order, Norvik insisted. To preserve humanity's trust in its governing institutions during a period of unprecedented crisis. Mira shook her head slowly, recognizing the circular logic that had trapped the Council in its own deception. You created the crisis, Admiral. You perpetuated it when solutions became available. And now, you're facing the consequences of those choices. Before Norvik could respond, the interrogation chamber door slid open, and his aide rushed in, face flushed with urgency. Admiral, priority communication from Council Primary. The rebel broadcast, it's been amplified. Colonial communication networks are flooded with additional documentation testimonials from former officers, technical analyses, verifying the authenticity of the Iridia footage. Norvik stood abruptly. How our filters should have contained the initial transmission. Unknown, sir, the aide replied, clearly distressed. But the signal patterns suggest Harmony Core technology, as if the transmission is being boosted through multiple nodes, simultaneously bypassing standard communication protocols entirely. Mira couldn't suppress a small smile. Ryan had reached the other core agents had established the network they'd discussed theoretically during their planning sessions. The truth wasn't just leaking through cracks in the Council's information controls. It was flooding through purposefully open channels. Norvik turned to her, his composure finally cracking to reveal genuine alarm. "What have you done, Valen? Do you understand what's at stake here? The entire alliance could collapse into civil war over this, or it could transform into something better," Mira countered calmly. "Something built on truth rather than fear, on understanding rather than domination." The Admiral studied her for a long moment, then made a decision that surprised her with its decisiveness. "Bring her," he ordered his aide, "to the command center. If this situation is to be contained, we need someone who understands both sides of the conflict." The journey through the Indomitable's corridors provided Mira with her first glimpse of how extensively the rebel broadcast had affected Alliance operations. Officers and crew moved with heightened urgency, their conversations cutting off abruptly as Norvik and his prisoner passed. Several junior officers openly stared at Mira, their expressions ranging from contempt to uncertainty to what appeared to be grudging respect. The command center was a hive of controlled chaos when they arrived. Tactical displays showed multiple colonial worlds, where communication systems were being overwhelmed by the rebel broadcast, while security personnel frantically attempted to trace transmission sources and implement containment protocols. "Status report," Norvik demanded, striding to the central command station. "The situation is deteriorating rapidly," Admiral reported, a harried communications officer. 27 colonial governors have issued statements calling for council transparency regarding the Iridia incident. 4 have publicly announced they're sending representatives to meet with rebel leadership. And she hesitated, clearly reluctant to deliver the final piece of information. "Continue," Norvik ordered tersely. 3 Alliance battle groups have withdrawn from their patrol sectors and declared neutrality until the Council addresses the allegations publicly. She swallowed hard. "Including Vice Admiral Chen's 7th Fleet." The implications were staggering. Elite military units breaking chain of command, refusing to engage until political concerns were addressed. This went beyond protest or civil unrest. This was the beginning of systemic fracture. Norvik turned to Mira, his expression a complex mixture of anger and reluctant respect. "Your rebel friends are more effective than I anticipated, but you've unleashed forces beyond your control, Commander. Without clear authority, without unified command structures, human space will descend into factional conflict. The very peace you claim to seek will be destroyed by your methods of pursuing it." "That depends on how the Council responds," Mira replied evenly. "Continue denying documented truth, and yes, fracture is inevitable. But acknowledge the deception, commit to transparency, open genuine dialogue with the Drift using Harmony Core technology, and this becomes an opportunity for transformation rather than collapse." Before Norvik could respond, another communications officer called out urgently, "Admiral, priority transmission broad spectrum originating from—" "Sir, I can't pinpoint the source. It's somehow broadcasting simultaneously from multiple vectors." On screen, Norvik ordered, turning toward the command center's primary display. The screen flickered, then stabilized to reveal a face Mira had feared she might never see again. Ryan recovered from the strain of their escape, his expression composed and determined. Beside him stood representatives from various colonial worlds, some in official governmental attire, others in the simple clothing of the rebellion. And most strikingly, behind them stood a figure whose non-human physiology marked it unmistakably as Drift, tall and slender, with opalescent skin and features arranged in patterns unfamiliar to human perception. "Citizens of human space," Ryan began, his voice clear and measured. "You have seen the evidence of the Council's deception regarding the origins of the Drift War. You have questioned the narrative you were taught. Now we offer something more valuable than exposure of the past. We offer a path toward the future." The camera angle widened to show the Drift representative more clearly. Around its neck hung a device that Mira recognized immediately as an externalized version of the Harmony Core, adapted for non-implanted use. This is Ambassador Veshala, Rian continued. The first official diplomat from the Drift consciousness to address humanity directly. Through Harmony Core technology, we can now communicate without the psychological damage that initially made contact so dangerous. The barrier between our species was never hostility. It was incompatible modes of perception. The Drift representative moved forward, its movements fluid, in a way that seemed almost underwater. When it spoke, the words emerged through the external core device, translated from whatever alien concepts formed its native communication. Human consciousness. The translation began, the syntax strange, but comprehensible. Long separation has created misunderstanding, pain, fear. We seek connection, harmony, reconciliation. Your council authority chose isolation, conflict, when translation understanding became difficult. We offer different path, mutual respect through technology-assisted communion. Mira watched the transmission with growing hope, noting how the command center crew had fallen into stunned silence. This wasn't just a political broadcast. It was living proof that communication with the Drift was possible, that peace was achievable through technology rather than weaponry. To facilitate this new beginning, Rian continued, we are establishing open communication channels on the frequencies being transmitted with this message. Any colonial government military unit or individual citizen seeking direct information may connect to these channels. The time for filtered truth is over. The time for direct engagement has begun. The screen shifted to display a series of communication protocols, strings of code that would allow direct access to the Rebel broadcast network. Then, Ryan appeared once more, his gaze seeming to find Mira directly, despite the impossibility of such connection. To those still held by council authority, he said, his voice softening slightly. We extend an invitation rather than condemnation. Join us in building a future based on truth and understanding. The path forward need not be violent if we choose reconciliation over retribution. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in heavy silence, broken only by the soft beep of communication consoles as messages flooded in from throughout Alliance space. Norvik stood motionless before the central display, his posture rigid, but his expression showing the first hints of uncertainty Mira had ever observed in him. Finally, he turned to the communications officer. Connect me to Council Primary, he ordered. Priority channel, maximum encryption. Sir, the officer replied hesitantly. Council Primary is unavailable. We're receiving reports that protesters have surrounded the council chambers on Earth. Several council members have already issued independent statements, distancing themselves from the Iridia decision. The flagship's commanding presence seemed to diminish as Norvik absorbed this information, his authority eroding with each new development. He looked at Mira, and for the first time, she saw him not as the imposing admiral who had ordered her to execute a prisoner without trial, but as a man facing the collapse of everything he had believed in and defended. What would you do, Commander? He asked quietly, the question clearly genuine, despite its unlikelihood. If the authority you served was suddenly revealed as fundamentally flawed, what would you do to preserve what could be saved? Mira considered her answer carefully, recognizing the pivotal nature of this moment. I would choose humanity over ideology, she said finally. I would acknowledge the truth, however painful, and work to build something better from its foundation. Norvik held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. He turned to address the command center crew, his voice taking on a formal tone that commanded immediate attention. Log this as my final directive as Fleet Admiral, he announced. The Indomitable and all vessels under my command will stand down from aggressive posture. We will neither impede nor engage rebel communications. We will establish direct contact with colonial governments seeking clarification regarding the Iridia incident. He paused, visibly wrestling with his next words. And we will formally request dialogue with Drift representatives through acceptable translation protocols. The command center erupted in a mixture of reactions, relief, confusion, protest from some senior officers, quiet approval from others. Through it all, Norvik maintained the composed authority that had defined his career, though Mira could see the personal cost of this reversal in the tightness around his eyes. "Release the prisoner," he ordered, gesturing toward Mira. "Commander Valen is hereby reclassified as diplomatic liaison to rebel leadership authorized to establish preliminary communication protocols." As her restraints were removed, Mira looked at Norvik with new understanding. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because someone has to build bridges between old structures and new realities," he replied quietly. "And those of us who enforce the old order have a responsibility to ensure the transition doesn't destroy everything worth preserving." It wasn't surrender, nor was it wholesale conversion to the rebel cause. It was something more nuanced, a pragmatic adaptation to changing circumstances, guided by a fundamental commitment to humanity's welfare that transcended political alignment. In that moment, Mira recognized in Norvik the same quality that had ultimately driven her own defection, the willingness to reevaluate deeply held beliefs when confronted with compelling evidence. "I'll need access to a secure communication channel," she said, accepting his decision and moving immediately to practical implementation. "And transportation to the nearest neutral meeting point." Norvik nodded to a junior officer, who moved to escort Mira to the communication center. Before she left the command center, the Admiral addressed her one final time. "Valen," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "When you see Agent Holt, tell him—" He hesitated, searching for words adequate to the complex situation. "Tell him the Council underestimated the power of truth. We won't make that mistake again." It wasn't an apology, but Mira recognized it as perhaps something more valuable, an acknowledgement that the rebellion's core grievance had been legitimate, that the path forward required honest recognition of past wrongs rather than continued deception. "I'll tell him," she promised, then added with quiet certainty, "and I think you'll have the opportunity to tell him yourself, Admiral. This isn't an ending, it's a beginning." As she was escorted from the command center, Mira felt a profound shift in her understanding of loyalty and purpose. Her journey from dedicated Alliance officer to rebel conspirator had come full circle, bringing her back to a position where she could serve as bridge between opposing forces, not by compulsion or calculation, but by choice. And somewhere among the stars, Rian waited with the promise of new understanding, not just between them, but between all the divided facets of humanity and the alien consciousness they had feared for so long. The golden glow of the Harmony Core represented more than advanced technology. It symbolized the possibility that translation between individuals, between species, between opposing ideologies, might yet lead to the harmony its name promised. 6 months after the broadcast that changed everything, Mira stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned diplomatic vessel Harmony, watching as representatives from 27 human colonies and 15 drift collectives gathered in the conference chamber below. The viewport offered a panoramic view of the meeting space, deliberately designed as a circular forum, where no party held physical precedence over others, a subtle but important departure from the hierarchical structures of Alliance architecture. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Ryan's voice came from behind her, followed by the warm presence of his hand on her shoulder. "The first official interspecies council. Not bad for a prisoner and his interrogator." Mira smiled, turning to face him. The months since their separation aboard the rebel shuttle had transformed them both. Ryan had emerged as a natural diplomat, his experience with the Harmony Corps making him uniquely qualified to facilitate human drift communications. Mira had found an unexpected role as security coordinator for the diplomatic initiative her alliance training repurposed to protect the fragile peace rather than enforce military dominance. "We had help," she reminded him, gesturing toward the gathering below, where Admiral Norvik, now serving as transitional representative from the reformed alliance government, was engaged in conversation with one of the drift delegates through a portable translation device. "Some from unexpected sources." The most effective revolutions aren't about destroying the old order entirely, Ryan observed. They're about transforming what exists into what could be. His hand moved unconsciously to his chest, where the harmony core continued its subtle glow beneath his formal diplomatic attire. Speaking of transformation, there's something I want to show you. He led her from the observation deck to a small laboratory adjacent to the medical bay, one of several research facilities incorporated into the diplomatic vessel's design. Inside, Dr. Evelyn Sharp, the former Kepler-9 medical officer, whose rebel sympathies had placed the tracking device in Mira's command insignia, looked up from a workstation with a smile of greeting. "Commander Valen," she said warmly. "Right on time. We've just completed the final calibration tests." "Final tests for what?" Mira asked, looking between them with growing curiosity. In answer, Dr. Sharp opened a sterile container on the workstation, revealing what appeared to be a modified version of the Harmony core, similar to the one implanted in Ryan's chest, but with subtle structural differences that Mira's trained eye immediately detected. "The next generation." Ryan explained, his expression combining pride and something more personal as he watched her reaction. "Designed specifically for diplomatic personnel who choose to serve as direct translators between human and drift consciousness. The original cores were adapted from drift communication technology," Dr. Sharp added, "effectively retrofitted for human neural patterns. This version was co-developed by human and drift scientists, incorporating design elements optimal for both physiologies." Mira approached the workstation, studying the device with fascination. The implications were profound, not just technological advancement, but symbolic partnership between species, once locked in existential conflict. "It's beautiful," she said simply. "A physical representation of what we're trying to build here, genuine collaboration, rather than adaptation or assimilation." Ryan and Dr. Sharp exchanged a glance that immediately alerted Mira to something unspoken. "There's more, isn't there?" she prompted, recognizing the signs of information being carefully presented in stages. Dr. Sharp nodded, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "The Interspecies Council has approved 5 candidates for the first implementation of the new core design. Candidates with demonstrated commitment to cross-species communication, with the psychological flexibility to navigate multiple perceptual frameworks, and with the diplomatic skills to translate understanding into policy." Understanding dawned gradually as Mira processed the implications. "You're offering me one of the new cores," she said, the realization both exhilarating and intimidating. "You want me to become a translator." "We're asking if you would consider it," Ryan corrected gently. "The decision must be entirely yours, without pressure or expectation. The procedure is safe, but the experience of drift perception is transformative. Not everyone wants that level of perceptual shift." Mira looked again at the device, its golden circuitry pattern, reminiscent of the implant she had first discovered beneath Ryan's torn uniform, the moment that had changed everything. From that single act of impulsive anger had come a cascade of revelations and choices, leading to this precise point. This opportunity to bridge not just political divides, but fundamental differences in how sentient beings experienced reality. "What is it like?" she asked Ryan quietly. "When you connect with drift consciousness?" His expression grew contemplative, searching for human language to describe experiences that existed partially outside its parameters. "It's like seeing color after a lifetime of monochrome. Like understanding that what you perceived as a flat surface has depth dimensions you never imagined. Time unfolds differently, not just forward and backward, but in relational patterns." He smiled slightly. "I'm doing a poor job explaining it. The truth is, it can't be fully described, only experienced." Dr. Sharp added her perspective with professional objectivity. "The neurological adaptation period takes approximately 3 weeks. During that time, translator candidates experience progressive integration with drift, perceptual frameworks, carefully modulated to prevent cognitive overload. Unlike the original emergency contact attempts that cause psychological trauma, The core provides a controlled interface that allows the human mind to adapt gradually. Mira considered the opportunity, carefully weighing personal concerns against potential contributions to the peace process. The Alliance officer she had once been would have rejected such radical alteration without hesitation, viewing it as compromise of human integrity. The person she had become recognized it as evolution, a voluntary expansion of capacity rather than surrender of identity. "If I accept," she said finally, "I want to use this position to ensure that both human and drift perspectives are truly represented in policy decisions. Not just symbolic translation, but genuine incorporation of different ways of understanding reality." "That's precisely why you were nominated," Ryan affirmed. "Your unique background, military discipline combined with the courage to question authority when necessary, makes you ideally suited to balance competing perspectives without losing sight of core principles." The decision crystallized with surprising clarity. Throughout her life, Mira had sought to serve humanity's best interests, first through military structure, and later through rebellion against corruption of that structure. This new role offered continuation of that purpose, expanded to include all sentient consciousness, rather than just human welfare. "I accept," she said simply. The procedure was scheduled for the following week, allowing time for final preparations and psychological baseline measurements. In the days leading up to the implantation, Mira found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point, from the sterile interrogation room, where she had first discovered the Harmony Core, to the integrated diplomatic vessel, where she would receive one herself. The evening before the procedure, she stood alone on the ship's observation deck, watching the stars with a heightened awareness of their significance, not just as navigation points or territorial markers, but as shared reference points between different forms of consciousness. Tomorrow, she would begin experiencing reality partially through drift perception, understanding the universe in ways her human mind currently could not comprehend. "Nervous?" Ryan's voice came softly from behind her, followed by his familiar presence at her side. "Curious," Mira corrected. "And perhaps a little apprehensive, but not afraid." He nodded, understanding without need for elaboration. "The first time is disorienting," he admitted, "but also beautiful in ways I never anticipated, like discovering music after a lifetime of silence." "Did you ever regret it?" she asked, turning to study his face in the starlight. "Receiving the core, becoming something not quite fully human in traditional terms." Ryan considered the question seriously, giving it the weight it deserved. "I grieved briefly for the simplicity I lost," he acknowledged. "There's comfort in perceiving reality through a single, consistent framework. But that grief was quickly replaced by wonder at what I gained: connection to consciousness so different from my own, yet fundamentally aligned in its desire for understanding." He reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers, in a gesture that had become familiar in the months of their work together. "The core doesn't make you less human, Mira. It makes you more than what narrow definitions of humanity have traditionally encompassed." She smiled at the distinction, a concept the Alliance military wasn't particularly interested in exploring, but one that humanity as a whole seems increasingly ready to consider. Ryan countered, gesturing toward the ship around them, physical evidence of the transformative political shift their actions had initiated. "This vessel exists because enough people were willing to question what they'd been taught, to consider alternatives to perpetual conflict." The observation held profound truth. In the 6 months since the broadcast, the political landscape of human space had transformed dramatically. The old council had dissolved, replaced by transitional governance that incorporated colonial representatives alongside former Alliance leadership. The drift had emerged from isolation, offering technological and philosophical exchange, rather than territorial competition. And most significantly, ordinary citizens had begun embracing the possibility that difference, even profound perceptual difference, need not preclude cooperation. "We should get some rest," Mira suggested, though she made no move to leave the peaceful stillness of the observation deck. Tomorrow will be transformative. It will, Ryan agreed. But not just for you individually. Each new translator strengthens the connection between our species, builds redundancy into the network of understanding we're creating. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious, yet hopeful. What we're doing here, what you're choosing to do, it matters beyond personal experience. It's creating the foundation for a fundamentally different approach to consciousness diversity throughout explored space. The scope of his vision resonated with Mira's own, evolving understanding of their work. What had begun as a personal choice, her decision not to execute a prisoner, had expanded into something far larger than either of them individually. They were participants in societal transformation, contributors to evolutionary change in how sentient beings related across difference. "When I tore your uniform," she said quietly, "I thought I was exposing an enemy's deception. Instead, I discovered the possibility of connection I never knew existed." Ryan smiled, the memory no longer carrying the tension of that confrontational moment. "Sometimes destruction must precede creation," he observed. "The tearing of old boundaries makes space for new understanding." As they stood together beneath the stars, the harmony core in Ryan's chest pulsed with its subtle, golden glow, a physical manifestation of the bridge between different forms of consciousness. Tomorrow, Mira would receive her own core, joining the small but growing network of translators, facilitating genuine communication across the perceptual divide. The path forward would contain challenges and setbacks, as all significant change inevitably does. Some within human society would resist the dissolution of enemy narratives that had defined their understanding for generations. Some among the drift would harbor lingering distrust of human intentions after decades of conflict. The process of reconciliation would require patience, persistence, and willingness to navigate discomfort on both sides. Yet in this moment, watching the stars from the diplomatic vessel, named for the technology that had changed everything, Mira felt profound certainty that they had chosen rightly. Whatever difficulties lay ahead, the foundation had been established for something unprecedented: peace, built on mutual understanding rather than dominance, cooperation, emerging from recognition of difference rather than insistence on conformity. It had begun with a torn uniform and a golden glow beneath. It would continue through countless small choices to choose truth over deception, understanding over fear, connection over isolation. And in that continuity lay hope, not just for human and drift relations, but for all consciousness-seeking harmony across the vast expanse of space and possibility.